about the Women in Payment Symposium is that when we've got all these breakouts happening, we've got all these executive panels taking place, we're thinking about payments around the world, we're thinking about technology, we're talking about innovation, we're thinking about regulation, we're thinking about what's happening today, what's going to happen tomorrow. There's so much content, and we always love it when we kick off with a really inspirational speaker. And I'm going to introduce her to you now, because what really matters is you get to hear from somebody who understands the world of transformation, the world of change, but also understands it from a career that has included many key parts. Now, I could stand and read her biography for some time, but actually I'm just going to put out some really key things because I know you'll be keen to hear from her as quickly as possible. So let me just give you an example. She held a position at the FCA leading both payment supervision and the regulator's globally recognized fintech agenda. She's worked many roles, including NatWest RBS and Global Transaction Services, leading on digital innovation, strategy, design, transformation, regulatory change. She's also this year, or last year, forgive me, was appointed to the board of Swift, sits on the FinTech investment board of her organization, and also, in addition to that, works in her capacity for other FinTech boards as well. She is the director of the payments industry and development of the Lloyds Banking Group, and we are delighted that she is here today. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Samantha Emery. I hope I did you justice.
Oh my goodness, what an introduction. Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I would like to thank Women in Payments, in particular, Christy and Teresa, for inviting me here to speak with you all today. And it's fantastic to be here to share some of my story and my career journey. And Christy talked about the theme, women driving the pulse of payments. And as I was ruminating in front of what was a very empty Word document, I realized it was actually quite fitting for a couple of reasons. I think it's fitting because of the nature of payments. Like the body's own circulatory system, which keeps us invisibly supplied with oxygen, nutrients, hormones, it performs a critical role whilst also interoperating with every single system of the body so they can do their jobs in keeping us alive. Does that sound familiar at all? Part of my own role covers settlement and liquidity for Lloyds Banking Group. We keep the money pumping around the system, and I've been known to quip that if we don't do our job, the bank ceases to be a bank pretty quickly. But it's also fitting given the nature of change in payments. There was a time when no one would have thought to check the pulse of payments. They would have been looking at things that were far more exciting. But payments is no longer in the basement. Yes, for the newbies, that was actually a thing. But it's rightly recognized now as being at the heart of banking and societal evolution. It's been having its rock star moment for some time now, and we've gotten used to running alongside it, but we're having to work harder to keep up, to keep our finger on the pulse of payments as it throws up opportunities and existential questions on a seemingly daily basis. So what does this mean for all of us and our careers as the women in payments? In short, a great deal. I'm seeing women, some of whom I'm happily able to call friends, achieving career highs and huge growth, and I am here for it. Notwithstanding recent turbulence, it has been introducing some new operating conditions for us that I'd like to shine a light on. Not so long ago now, I was considering potential roles and something struck me. COVID had been an odd period where a few thrived, but most were treading water or merely survived. And yet from the start of the pandemic to the end of the pandemic, my CV's market value was up. The demand in the sector had increased. Everything that we're doing to stay on that pulse of payments was hoovering up resource. And on the supply side, the age-old excuses of the talent doesn't exist, we don't have the pipeline, had been put firmly in the bin, and ever more sophisticated approaches were being made to secure what was, to my mind, broadly the same CV. Whether you realize it or not, I'd wager it's the same for each and every one of you. It got so intensive that I ended up in the semi-comedic situation of being courted by various CIOs called John. True story. And I had a number of fantastic options on the table. This isn't a humble brag, there's a genuine point, so do stick with me. There was a time for me where payments seemed impenetrable. Everybody talked in jargon and they loved the fact that they did. The same faces sat in the same chairs ad infinitum, and it was really hard to get a look in. I had to be tactical. It's why, as you heard, my experience is more interdisciplinary. And I've never sold myself purely as a payments person. I needed an edge. I still hear at times the great and the good of payments declare in speeches in closed rooms how lovely it is to know 95% of the people in the room since a year beginning with 19. It's not, it's problematic, it's symptomatic of a closed shop. Now, that being said, more widely, systems and structures of power were being challenged. Things were finally changing for the good, and I had evidence of this. I know since then, economic tightening has come to the fore again, but this is where hopefully we prove out that change is here to stay by maintaining and ideally positively shifting the needle position. But where did witnessing this shift leave me? A woman who was very skilled in the art of managing scarcity, entering an era of abundance. I'll be honest, in a funk, in part lacking the toolkit to work through this newfound level of choice. I share this because these operating conditions have an opportunity to be a huge accelerant to all of your careers if you're ready to meet them. And it's what events like this can really support. But I also reflect on what else supported me to engage with this emerging era of abundance. Indeed, what had supported me through my career to date. Who I turned to when I needed to sense check, learn something new, gain clarity. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but look around the room. It also takes a village to navigate a career as someone from the underrepresented genders. Yes, plural. And so the intersections cutting through that, ethnicity, ability, orientation, and so on. As you climb higher, it's said that the air is more rarefied. I found it was just rarer to meet people like me. As I progressed within organizations and began engaging with industry and company boards, I found I was increasingly the first, the only, the few. No one person can carry all of that. I needed a village in the city, and so do all of you. One of my good friends, Dr. Leda Glyptis, coined a name for this village, the tribe, a self-selected community of obligation that chooses to support each other for no other reason than they want to, a truly beautiful thing. It was then I realized that I'd always struggled with the traditional framing of the network for development. Centering yourself and working outwards felt too point-to-point and transactional. This is my mentor, my sponsor, my old boss, my industry peers, the people they all know. Far too awkward for me. Indeed, in the earliest part of my career, I didn't recognize any of the isms beyond concepts, as I'd not hit any glass ceilings or been close enough to witness others struggling to break through them. By the time that I did, I felt I had nowhere to go. At the time, women's networks were abundant, but they didn't feel like my space. I belatedly realized why, and I recognized, even within social justice movements, we can get it wrong. I found that often they perpetuated what they fought by collapsing women's identity into motherhood and not exploring the different paths to fulfillment open to women and the opportunities and challenges surrounding them. The intersectionality of gender is enormous and goes well beyond birthing status. And I didn't feel that there were spaces at that time to engage with the variety of experiences faced by different women. So long story short, networking hadn't naturally clicked, but the tribe did. As a long-time rugby player, used to putting my body on the line for others and the trust that they'd do the same in return, being part of a tribe made much more sense. Reframing the whole thing as a federated group of individuals who all had parts to play in supporting an ecosystem actually felt so much easier to connect with because we all needed each other. In her blog, The Power of the Tribe, Leda quotes another proverb, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Just sit with that for a moment. Like many villages and tribes, there's a colourful cast of characters who play different roles at different times. And like the wonderful Sir David Attenborough, I take the approach that you can only appreciate and be moved to protect what you can truly see. Indeed, over time, I've gotten far better at spotting and cataloguing these wonderful humans. If not in your offices, they're found in the fringes of industry events, on podcasts, even on LinkedIn. There's just something in how they connect with the sector's people and its problems that marks them out and makes them easy to engage with. So make the connection. I'll share some of my research with you now to help you on your journey to find your tribe, and importantly, what roles you might play in it for others. The first group is called the uncomplicated few. They are the rarest of breeds and to be protected at all costs. Their superpower is their lack of ego. They don't let agendas get in the way of what's in front of them, and therefore they don't feel the pressure to replicate the status quo in the same way. Importantly for me, who doesn't fit into many of society's boxes, these are the people who see you for you. Your skills and potential aren't clouded by whether or not you, the person, make sense for them. My best example of this is still one of my favorite people in payments. A guy who interviewed me to work for him, then convinced his boss to hire me as his peer, and then spent the years that followed checking those who sought to challenge my progress despite my good work because they didn't get me. And notwithstanding these challenges, he also helped me how to learn how to exploit the opportunities that come with being underestimated or misunderstood. Next up are the truth tellers. They are there to share either what you cannot see or do not want to. Often you only know you need this person after the fact. A razor-sharp CFO who observed me in my early career leadership struggling to carve out my identity amongst the five-a-side and the pub boys club with words that will forever ring in my ears, and it is a direct quote, so excuse the crassness. "You don't need to prove you have bigger balls than the men, Sam." End quote. Yes, she was quite something. And later in my career, an ex-co member picked me up from near rock bottom, explaining to me that I'd been the victim of bullying and racial gaslighting, which helped me on a much needed journey of healing and growth. Others saw, they heard, they knew, but they didn't or they couldn't vocalize it. These are the people who highlight where you're not maximizing your value and call out the spaces where it's not being recognized. I'm sad to say that I've recently played the same role in return for another colleague turned friend. The tribe pays it forward and the tribe rises together. A critical group come next, the allies. We know this one, right? But the clincher is obviously the consistency with which allyship is demonstrated. Who always has their eyes open to events that play out, knows their own relative power or privilege within them, and is willing to act. We now have empirical evidence that proves the need for allies, that the social cost of negotiating pay is high for women and negligible for men. And also that underrepresented groups will receive criticism for driving diversity and inclusion, where the overrepresented earn plaudits. I was walking across London Bridge last week, having yet again completely misjudged the early spring weather. And a woman walking towards me said I looked so cold, and she bear hugged me. Now, don't get me wrong, there were many things wrong with this. The Londoner in me thought I was being mugged. The question of consent was not addressed, which I know could be very jarring for some. And let's also acknowledge the possibility that she was under the influence of something. However, putting all of that to one side, it actually underlined one thing about humanity that drives many random acts of kindness, that even a total stranger can look at you in that psychological moment, see exactly what you need, and give it to you. It made me reflect on how culturally acceptable it has been in the past to not see what others need and why, and also on how those who are willing but unsure can gain the confidence to act to move society forward as allies. In the work context, little of this is a binary good versus bad. For me, it's about honesty and choices. what we choose to see and what we choose to act on. Active allies recognize that not choosing is a choice, and they keep themselves honest on this. Active allies know that if we've proven one thing, it's that good intentions will not move the dial, and they're ready to do the work. The final group in my tribe is the squad, aptly named as rugby provided me with invaluable lived experience of women supporting other women in such a visible way, both physically and emotionally, that I find it provides a really useful counter to the prevailing narratives. I know what good looks like. These are the people who provide unfailing support, the people who've kept me clear on my value and encouraged me to step into my power, the ones who will mention your name in that room full of opportunities, the ones you sound out and run key decisions by. Now, I have a small number of fantastic women who span my personal and professional life, who provide this mutual support one-to-one to each other, and I value them immensely. However, not to be outdone by Taylor Swift and her girl squad, I have also had the benefit of a squad off the pitch, a guy squad, a group of men who took it upon themselves to set me up for success in a new environment, cheerlead the value add that I've delivered, and encourage me to push forward to do things that I never imagined because they believed I could. Truly incredible, one and all. Now, your tribe might start small, may ebb and flow in size over time, may see people playing a number of roles, but it will sustain with time and effort. I may have started my career running alone, but I feel I can go further now, running together with my tribe. It's helped me wrangle with a number of things. How who I am shapes my career, what I stand for, what I give my energy to, and what's not worth my time. So who am I and what have I learned after over 15 years in financial services? I think putting myself on the therapist couch, my team who are here today won't be surprised. They've heard this before, but starting from the very beginning, I describe myself as an explorer or an adventurer, and a couple of things shaped this. I was socialized into diversity at a very young age. I grew up in a blended family, which was made up of different ethnicities, different abilities, sexualities, socioeconomic backgrounds, and so on. We were different, but we all belonged. It was only later that I realized what was normal for me was actually atypical for others. And seeing the ramifications of that as I entered the workplace fostered a personal commitment to help others see the beauty and the opportunity in difference. I also had a somewhat nomadic childhood, though the corporate version, not the bohemian one. What it meant was that change was also normalized for me, and I got used to re-establishing myself in a new environment every few years, building self-actualizing skills that meant if I knew what I wanted, I could find a way to get there. It took me time to realize that what saw me drawn in my personal life to endlessly reading books, learning foreign languages, compulsively traveling, even jumping into contact sports, was the same thing that in my professional life saw me working across payments change, technology, product, strategy, and regulation. And for years, whilst my career moves felt right at the time, the thread wasn't as easy to articulate as someone who'd moved up the functional line. However, spending some time on personal branding some years back, it all clicked. My professional journey makes much more sense when viewed through that lens of explorer or adventurer. Those are my drivers. I'm always drawn to the new, the unanswered, the complex. I'm a change agent and I'm an activist. My behaviors, I'm always questioning and challenging and agitating for better in every aspect of my life. Being change positive was something I managed to turn to my advantage through what I observed in the workplace. I tended to find those holding power in the status quo were less inclined to feel uncomfortable. They were simply not used to it. This was a superpower in a time where sponsorship wasn't served up in the same way as it was to male peers. Now, at this point, some of you will be rolling your eyes at what you feel is talk of glass cliff opportunities, and others will be wondering precisely what they might be. I'll explain. The term glass cliff opportunity comes from studies that have shown that there's an increased likelihood of underrepresented genders and ethnicities to be offered leadership positions at times of crisis or turmoil, when it's more precarious or risky. There's nothing to lose in trying something different when that close to disaster. And if it works, they're so open-minded, such a renegade, it's brilliant. And I just reflect in the UK, the 3 female prime ministers that we've had, Thatcher, May, and Truss, all came to power when things weren't looking too rosy and when the usual suspects were nowhere to be found. Now, the world may have moved on from a representation perspective, but the challenging conditions still remain, the ambiguity remains. So my take on these situations is to be aware of what you're stepping into rather than beware. I might have been considered to have succeeded or failed in those situations that were naturally tipped towards failure. And I've learned from every single one of them. But the safeguard is to see them for what they are and be able to judge your results accordingly, irrespective of what the external perception is. So on to what I've learned. So I call this section 3 things I don't believe in and 1 thing I do. First up, the meritocracy. I think we all know it's a fallacy. Third wave D&I recognizes that it's not just bringing in diverse talent and having interventions that support that talent. Those are good, but they're not good enough. True inclusivity needs structural change to shake up the power dynamics and the decision making. And we will have only achieved some semblance of meritocracy when working twice as hard to get half as far is not something that we talk about anymore. Indeed, the ability to be passably mediocre does not have dire consequences for you, as it does not currently have dire consequences somehow for others. And this is the point where everyone's probably thinking about someone in the room, and that's fine, you deserve it. Now, next up, what else don't I believe in anymore? The word microaggression. In short, they feel pretty macro to me. And I think it does a disservice to the friction that underrepresented groups go through every day just being themselves. The linguist in me knows words have power. And as a society, we've made lots of negative and impactful behavior small by sticking the word micro on the front of it. Enough said. And finally, for similar reasons, I no longer believe in imposter syndrome. Now, I know this is controversial for some, but let me explain. I think modern society loves the diagnosis, and whilst I have no issue with this, I recognize that it can become unhelpful when it becomes almost synonymous with the underrepresented. They, or rather we, become the problem to fix, and we internalize it. I do believe anxiety and stress are normal human emotions that are part of our survival mechanisms, and finding tools and techniques to cope with that are important. It's more how we frame it that bothers me. We know women feel the alleged imposter syndrome more than men, women of color more than white women. It scores higher in organizational cultures where psychological safety is low. There's a definite theme here. There's also a name for when a person suffering as a result of external factors is the one held to account for their own suffering. Victim blaming. If we normalize human emotions, the thing that remains is an environment that is making you feel like you don't belong, is not making you feel safe enough, is making you feel like an imposter. So I'm not internalizing it anymore. I'm not giving it that power. And I'm seeing it as a product of me entering spaces and whether or not I feel like I belong. When I think about my most challenging moments, they all come down to times when I felt isolated. And a fantastic quote by Dr. Brené Brown talks about the opposite of belonging being fitting in. When you're trying to fit in, it's lonely. It occurs more easily when you're in an out group. You can see it all, but others easily miss it and they gaslight you when you raise it. Dr. Brené says belonging is belonging to yourself first, speaking your truth, telling your story, and never betraying yourself for other people. That true belonging doesn't require you to change who you are, it requires you to be who you are, and that's vulnerable. So a perfect segue into the one thing I do now believe. I believe you can't fail, but that you can fail yourself. that getting something wrong, an opportunity not working out, that's not failure, that's life. I think even when we win, society's only way of handling it is to do the same thing again and again and again. And we know this has been the death knell of many companies, but it can be as detrimental to careers. And we don't get taught how to frame endings properly, how to frame them positively. And I, for one, am still working on it. As I mentioned earlier, I don't fit neatly into many boxes. More often than not, I'm crashing into norms, assumptions, stereotypes. So this idea of focusing on not failing myself actually becomes really important for me to work on, because failing yourself can cause damage. You have to be clear on what you need and what you deserve by way of treatment and hold others to it. You need to be selfish in managing your energy. It's your most precious resource. And you should be unapologetic in taking up space and saying yes. The first time in my career I saw anyone Black on an executive board in a company I worked in was just over 4 years ago. Representation matters, as we heard earlier from Julia. See it to be it as real, and recognize you might become the person that you needed to see. I say this standing here humbly as the joint most senior Black executive in the biggest retail bank in the UK, as the first board member of Black heritage on a number of boards that I now support, and the first female deputy chair of a major global organization which underpins our industry. So in closing, let's remind ourselves, the payment sector is dynamic. It's full of challenge, it's full of opportunity, it's exciting. For many in underrepresented groups in the workplace, things are finally starting to change. Build that toolkit for abundance that we talked about earlier. Find your tribe, understand exactly what your superpowers are, and learn how not to fail yourself. If you can do those 4 things, then come what may, there's always a way forward. If I had one message to leave you with today, it would be that. Thank you for listening.